I moved to the Philippines with one mindset, but living there made me rethink everything. When I first came to the Philippines, I thought I had everything figured out. It wasn't the country that was the problem, it was the mistakes I didn't even realize I was making until it was too late. We break down the biggest mistakes and mindset shifts people experience after moving to the Philippines, backed by insights from Numbio, Internations, and Expatistan. Stick around until the end, where I reveal the one realization that completely changed my mind about living here. I thought I had the Philippines figured out within my first week, and that was my first mistake. When I first arrived, everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. The colors were brighter, the pace felt lighter, and life seemed easier. I stepped off the plane with this quiet confidence, like I had cracked some kind of life code that other people were still chasing. It didn't take long before that confidence turned into certainty, and that's where things started to go wrong. Mistake number one, thinking I had it all figured out. It started with the simplest thought, this is cheaper, and on the surface, it really did seem that way. Meals cost less, transportation was affordable, and rent looked like a bargain compared to what I was used to. I remember doing quick mental math, converting prices, and feeling like I had unlocked a financial cheat code. But what I didn't see yet were the hidden costs, the trade-offs, the inconsistencies, and the moments where cheap didn't always mean better value. I was judging everything too quickly, based on snapshots instead of the full picture. Then came the second thought, this is better. And honestly, in many ways, it felt true. The people were warm, the lifestyle felt more relaxed, and there was this sense of freedom that was hard to explain. It was easy to romanticize everything. The sunsets, the smiles, the slower pace of life. I started comparing everything to where I came from, and almost always the Philippines seemed to win. But what I didn't realize was that I was still in the honeymoon phase. I was seeing the highlights, not the behind-the-scenes reality. I confused emotional highs with long-term sustainability. And then, maybe the most dangerous thought of all, this is easy. I believed adapting would be simple. I thought I could just slide into this new life without friction, that things would naturally work themselves out. Need to set something up? No problem. Adjust to a new system? Easy. Build a routine? Done. But reality doesn't work like that, especially in a completely different environment. There were cultural nuances, systems that worked differently, and moments where easy turned into confusion, delays, and frustration. What I didn't understand at the time is this: early confidence hides long-term problems. That initial feeling of, I've got this, can blind you. It makes you overlook the cracks because everything still feels new and exciting. You don't question things deeply, you just accept them at face value. And because nothing has gone seriously wrong yet, you assume nothing will. But life isn't measured in your first week or even your first month. It's measured in the patterns that show up over time. The things you ignore early on have a way of circling back, often at the worst possible moment. Looking back, that confidence wasn't entirely wrong, but it was incomplete. It was built on limited experience, filtered through excitement and assumptions. And while it felt good in the moment, it set me up to learn some lessons the hard way. Because the truth is, the Philippines didn't need to change. My mindset did. Stick around, we've just started. Wait till you hear about the next phase in my stay on the island. The little things didn't bother me at first, until they started showing up every single day. After that early wave of confidence, life in the Philippines began to feel more real. Not worse, just less filtered. The excitement was still there, but it was now sharing space with small, persistent inconveniences that I hadn't really accounted for. And that's where mistake number 2 crept in: ignoring daily life reality. It started with traffic. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it's part of the experience. Sitting in a car or a jeepney, watching the city slowly crawl forward, didn't seem like a big deal in the beginning. I'd look around, take it in, even find it interesting. But as days turned into weeks, that same traffic stopped being a novelty and started becoming a routine. A quick trip wasn't always quick. Plans needed buffers. Time became less predictable. And suddenly, something I once shrugged off started shaping my entire day. Then there were errands. Simple things. Things I used to do without thinking started taking longer than expected. Whether it was paying a bill, getting something repaired, or just picking up essentials, I found myself adjusting to a different rhythm. Processes weren't always streamlined. Sometimes it took multiple steps, multiple visits, or just more patience than I was used to giving. In the beginning, I told myself, no rush, I've got time. But over time, those extra minutes and hours began to stack up. And then there was infrastructure friction. The subtle but constant resistance you feel when systems don't quite align with what you're used to. Internet that slows down when you need it most. Power interruptions that come without warning. Sidewalks that suddenly disappear, forcing you into the road. None of these things were catastrophic on their own, but together they created a kind of background noise that followed me throughout the day. Here's the thing I didn't understand early on. At first, it's small. Then it becomes your daily life. That's the shift no one really prepares you for. When everything is new, you tolerate more. You adapt quickly. You even overlook things because you're still riding that initial high. But once the novelty fades, what's left are the patterns, the repeated experiences that define how you actually live. And those small frustrations, they don't stay small if they happen every day. In retrospect, I wasn't wrong to be optimistic. I was just incomplete in how I saw things. I focused on the big picture and ignored the fine print. But in reality, it's the fine print that shapes your routine, your mood, and your overall experience. Because living somewhere isn't about the highlights, it's about what you deal with on a random Tuesday afternoon. Keep watching as we enter the third phase of my Filipino lifestyle. I didn't realize it at the time, but I wasn't building a new life. I was trying to import my old one. After the excitement faded and the small frustration settled in, I found myself clinging to what felt familiar. That's when mistake number 3 took over. Trying to recreate my old lifestyle in a completely different environment. On the surface, it made sense. Stick to what you know, keep your routines, maintain your standards. But in reality, it created a quiet mismatch that kept growing in the background. It started with my Western habits, the way I structured my day, how I approached time, even how I expected services to work. It all came from a completely different system. I expected things to be fast, predictable, and consistent. If something said it would take an hour, I expected it to take an hour. If a store was open, I assumed it would operate exactly as advertised. But the rhythm here was different, more flexible, more fluid, sometimes less precise. And instead of adjusting, I kept measuring everything against the standards I brought with me. Then came the comfort expectations. I didn't just want to live, I wanted to feel the same level of comfort I was used to. Reliable internet, consistent air conditioning, familiar food, quiet spaces, convenience at every step. And while many of those things do exist, they often come at a premium or require extra effort to maintain. I started choosing places, services, and routines that mimicked what I had before, even if it meant stretching my budget or complicating my setup. That's when I noticed something subtle but important. I was spending more, not because I had to, but because I was trying to feel normal. All right? I'd choose the more expensive option because it felt closer to what I knew. I'd go out of my way for imported products. I'd prioritize convenience over adaptation. And slowly, the cost advantage I thought I discovered in the beginning started to shrink. Not because the Philippines was expensive, but because I was making it expensive for myself. In hindsight, the real issue wasn't the country. It was my approach. I wasn't adapting. I was trying to copy my old life in a new place. And that strategy doesn't work for long. It creates friction, not just financially, but mentally. You're constantly comparing, constantly adjusting, but never really settling in. You end up living in between two worlds, holding on to one while trying to exist in another. The turning point came when I started questioning that instinct. What if the goal wasn't to recreate what I had, but to understand what actually works here? Because living abroad isn't about replication. It's about recalibration. Make sure to watch all the way through. You won't believe what I realized during the next phase of my life on the island. I came to the Philippines expecting to save money. What I didn't expect was how quickly that assumption would fall apart. At the beginning, everything pointed to one simple belief. This is a cheap country. That idea shows up everywhere. Online, in conversations, in travel content. And to be fair, there's truth to it. But what I didn't understand was how conditional that truth really is. That's where mistake number 4 hit me. Believing the cheap country myth without questioning what it actually means. At first, my spending felt under control. Rent seemed reasonable, food was affordable, and day-to-day expenses didn't look intimidating. But then something subtle started to happen. My definition of comfortable began to shape my spending more than I realized. Costs rise with comfort. That's the part no one really emphasizes. The more I tried to optimize my lifestyle, better location, stronger internet, quieter environment, more reliable utilities, the more the price crept up. I wasn't just paying for basics anymore. I was paying for consistency, convenience, and peace of mind. And those things, anywhere in the world, come at a premium. What once felt like a budget-friendly setup slowly turned into something much closer to what I would have spent back home. Then came lifestyle inflation. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, almost invisible. A slightly nicer place here, a more convenient service there. Choosing comfort over cost without really thinking about it. Each decision felt small and justified in the moment, but over time, those upgrades stacked on top of each other. And before I knew it, my monthly expenses had shifted into a completely different range. The surprising part? I wasn't living extravagantly. I was just trying to maintain a version of life that felt familiar and easy. That's when the realization hit me. It's only cheap if you're willing to live differently. If you fully lean into the local lifestyle, adjust your expectations, embrace the trade-offs, and let go of certain comforts, then yes, the Philippines can be incredibly affordable. But if you try to replicate a more Western standard of living, or even just prioritize convenience and predictability, the costs now start to align much more closely with what you're used to. And that's not a flaw, it's just reality. Reminiscing, the mistake wasn't that I spent more, it's that I walked in with a simplified idea of what things would cost without understanding the variables behind it. I treated affordability like a fixed rule instead of a flexible equation. Because in the end, the Philippines isn't simply cheap or expensive. It reflects your choices. And once I understood that, everything about how I approach money and life here started to change. You'll want to see what shifted in me during the last phase of my stay in the country. Trust me. The turning point didn't come from the outside. It came from a shift I wasn't expecting to make. By this stage, I had already gone through the excitement, the small frustrations, the lifestyle mismatch, and the budget wake-up call. But something still felt off. It wasn't just about money or convenience anymore. It was deeper than that. That's when I ran into mistake number 5, expecting the country to fit me instead of adjusting myself to fit the country. At first, it showed up as quiet frustration with systems. Things didn't always work the way I thought they should. Processes felt slower, less predictable, sometimes even confusing. Whether it was dealing with paperwork, setting up services, or navigating everyday logistics, I kept running into moments where I thought, why isn't this more efficient? And every time that thought came up, it carried a little bit of tension with it. But the bigger issue was what was happening in my mindset. I was constantly comparing everything to the US. Every experience became a side-by-side evaluation. How fast is this compared to back home? How reliable is this? How convenient is that? And without realizing it, I had turned my entire experience into a comparison game I couldn't win. Because no matter what, the Philippines wasn't designed to operate like the US. And expecting it to do so was setting myself up for constant disappointment. The more I compared, the more I noticed differences. And the more I noticed differences, the more those differences started to feel like problems, even when they weren't. It created this subtle resistance to the environment I had chosen to be in. Then one day, it clicked. That's when I realized I wasn't unhappy because of the Philippines. I was unhappy because of my expectations. Nothing around me had suddenly changed. The traffic was the same, the systems were the same, the pace of life was the same. What changed was how I was seeing it. I started asking a different question. What if this isn't wrong, just different? That shift didn't solve everything overnight, but it removed the constant friction I had been creating in my own head. Instead of forcing everything to match what I was used to, I began observing, adjusting, and slowly accepting. Because living in a different country isn't about finding a perfect match. It's about learning how to exist without needing everything to feel familiar. And once that shift started to happen, something else followed, something I didn't expect. For the first time since I arrived, things started to feel lighter. You might be taken aback by what I will reveal as the actual reason that made me change my mind about the Philippines. I didn't change my mind about the Philippines. I changed my mind about how I was living. For a long time, I thought the shift would come from the place. That somehow, moving to a new country would automatically create a better life. But the truth turned out to be much less convenient and a lot more honest. It wasn't because the Philippines failed. It was because I realized something most people don't talk about. Moving abroad doesn't fix your life. It just exposes how you live. All the patterns I had before, they came with me. The same habits led to the same problems. If I avoided structure before, I still avoided it here. If I relied on convenience, I kept chasing it, even when it cost more or created stress. Changing the environment didn't erase those tendencies. It magnified them. And then there were expectations. The same expectations led to the same frustrations. I expected things to feel familiar, to work the way I was used to align with what I thought was normal. And every time reality didn't match that expectation, it created friction, not because something was wrong, but because I was measuring it against the wrong standard. That's when it really clicked. I didn't need a different country. I needed a different approach to living. Once I stopped looking for the perfect place and started focusing on how I was actually living day to day, everything began to shift. Not instantly, but meaningfully. If I could do it all over again, I'd do a few things very differently. First, I'd design my lifestyle before choosing the location. Instead of asking, where should I live? I'd ask, how do I want to live? Because the place should support the lifestyle, not the other way around. Second, I'd adapt early instead of resisting. The faster you accept that things will be different, the easier it becomes to find your rhythm. Resistance just delays that process. And third, I'd build structure before chasing freedom. Freedom sounds great, but without structure, it turns into inconsistency. And inconsistency is where most problems start. Here's what I've come to believe. The people who truly enjoy living abroad don't chase a better place. They build a better system. They understand their habits, adjust their expectations, and create routines that actually work in their environment. And that brings me back to the Philippines. The Philippines can be an amazing place to live. The lifestyle, the people, and the opportunities are all genuinely there if you take the time to see them. But the experience you have depends heavily on how you approach it from the start. If you move with the wrong expectations or repeat the same mistakes I made, things can quickly become frustrating instead of fulfilling. In the end, you'll end up learning the same lessons I had to learn the hard way, just through your own experience. To see what life in the Philippines is really like, explore our other videos where we uncover the expat experience most people don't talk about.